Assalamu alaikum. We are really honored to have Navid with us. He's very unusual body of work which we are lucky to be able to access, and many thanks to the Goethe Institute, which is a place of significant part in my own life. My mentor and teacher was Dr. Anna Marie Schimmel, who told me that the spot in which civilization resided in Karachi was at the Goethe Institute. So I thank you. And it's very interesting how life works, because Navid is, according to all the things that are written, very distinguished and a special scholar of things Islamic. But you know, a bio doesn't really tell you about a person, and what is important about this is to really have a chance to experience the work that he has made for us to read, because it's accessible, it's special, and it's much more than what this bio says, which is that he's a German writer and an expert in Islamic studies. He was born in Siegen, Germany, and of Iranian parents. He's written many books and novels, as well as essays on Islam, the Middle East, and the Christian-Muslim dialogue, quite vital in this day and age where there are so many ruptures. So, you know, we hear his voice in articles, in literary reviews, and so on. And he has, of course, won numerous prizes, notably, I'm not going to do this right, but the Buber Rosenweig Medal in 2011. He's a member of the German Academy for Language and Poetry and the Academy of Sciences in Hamburg. So we welcome you here, Navid. And I'm just going to begin by having a conversation with Navid, because it's an opportunity for us to know him in a less formal context than delivering a lecture. You know, the book that we are going to discuss is The Terror of God, which is Athar, Job, and the Metaphysical Revolt. It's an intertwining of the question that Job asks about God through the lens of the mystic Fariduddin Athar, and Navid will correct me because I am not as familiar, but in my perusing of the things, the quotes that he has chosen are really so very moving, and I'm just going to pick something from the Conference of the Birds, which was my assigned reading by Dr. Schimmel, and it caused great consternation in my heart and in my mind, because to truly open myself to the mystic way required an act of discipline that my spoilt self found difficult to achieve. So here's one thing that I'd like to open with that Navid has put in the first part of his book, which is called The Book of Suffering. Actually, you know, I think the table of contents is very revealing, because the first one is Job's question, then the Book of Suffering, the justification and terror of God, the rebellion against God, and the history of counter-theology. That gives you just a very raw outline of what he is trying to achieve in this conversation. So we will begin by, life has been no use to me. Vain all my work and words. No one helps me, nowhere a friend. Life wasted, not one success. When I still could, I knew not what for, and once I knew, I no longer could. Now I know of no other way, know only helplessness and misery. So it's a point to start. Navid, I turn it over to you. Please share with us what you were doing by writing this Terror of God.
Well, for an author, of course, it's difficult to summarize a book, because in his perspective, if he could have summarized, he would not have to write the book. But I will try to begin with a personal approach to the book, to the question. Well, of course, this is one of my academic books, and it's based on studies and reflection on literature and so on. But the question which is underlying the book is the question I think every human being asks. And Attar, the Persian poet of the 13th century asked himself, and Job, the biblical prophet, asked himself that, well, if God is omnipotent, if God is almighty, why there's all this suffering, and not only suffering, but why the just people are suffering. I mean, the special point of the story of Job in the Bible, and also not so much in the Quran, but in the Islamic literature, is not that Job is just suffering, but he is the most just of all human beings, the most pious of all human beings. He's the most perfect of all human beings, and he's the one who has to suffer. So this, of course, this question is not a historical one and not a theological one, but I think all of us knows of these situations, that be it in catastrophes like the flood in Pakistan, why these people are suffering. I mean, they are innocent. Why the children who have no choice? And I start the book. With telling of my aunt. My aunt was the oldest sister of my father. She was always the most merciful, the most compassionate, very pious person, always had God on her lips. And she suffered a lot, because of her, arthritis and other things. At the end of her life, she couldn't even move. She just could, with her hand on the ground, she could. But she never complained. Never. Until the end of her life, she was always laughing, always praying, always thanking God. And we asked her, what is she? For what is she thankful? But she always had this, this kind of humanity and mercifulness. She was and passion on her mind, but at the end of her life, and I have to be careful not to cry again. But at the end of it, she got a what is Schlaganfall in German, in English? Stroke. Yeah, she got a stroke, and so all of her physical ability went away. From one to another day, she was already 80 years, but she looked like 130 years. And she lied there. She had terrible pain, and everything was wrecked down beside her ability to think and to reflect. So she could not talk anymore. She yielded of pain. And nothing could help her. Even the morphine could not really help her. And at the end of her life, we saw, and we were all shocked, that we saw that she got angry. And we saw Job's question in her eyes. She could not talk. But she was not the merciful, passionate, aunt anymore. She was someone, she was really the whole time, we saw that she was speaking with someone else. And probably she was speaking with the Almighty. And question, why? Why me? And it went for 2 or 3 years, this suffering. So that was a most terrible experience of suffering which I had, and I have seen a lot of suffering. I've traveled around the world. I've been to war. I've seen people, but seeing having that in mind, what lady she was, and what she became at the end of her life. And so this is a question, in mind, which Attar has in mind. You have two solutions to answer the question why God, who's almighty, let people suffering, especially the just people, the children suffering. I mean, you could say that if a brutal man suffers at the end of his life, well, that is, in God's plan. It's just that. But why those who have not committed sins, those who are pious, who are, have done everything God wanted from them. And, well, one question is to justify God. Theology of Christianity, of Islam, of Judaism have done it and have elaborated important and very thoughtful and elaborated books. So try to bring that together. The basic question of Islamic kalam, of Islamic theology, started exactly from that point, the debate between Ash'arites and Mu'tazilites. The question was, why all the suffering? And the Mu'tazilites, the rational kalam of Islamic history, they started to say, to emphasize human free will. So at the end of the day, it's human's free will. Who is responsible? God led people, and it went so far that even earthquakes, somehow they started to think, well, but it has to do with physical things that humans are responsible for, just to get God free from this responsibility. The other, afterwards, more dominant school of Islamic kalam, the Ash'arites, were emphasized God's almightiness by reducing God's human's free will and saying that at the end we don't know how this comes together. Well, a second possibility is, of answering the question why all the suffering is on earth, although God is almighty, is to negate God, of course, to say there's no God. A God which allows this cannot be. There can't be a just God, a merciful God. And we have, in Islamic history, we had many poets and even scholars who became atheists, in the Middle Ages. It's not something which is uncommon to the history of, well, you cannot call it Islamic literature, but to the history of Persian and Arabic and probably also the Indian literatures, that people who were religious became atheists, explicit atheists, because of the suffering in the world. Just to name one, sorry, I just had an influenza, and then I still have this, I have to
The Almighty is listening to you and He's going to make you better.
No problem. I'm just quoting. I have here. So just to name one is Ibn Arawandi, who went out and attacked God and said, but he attacked the God he did not believe in. So so these are the basic things, basic solutions which you come off thinking that, either justify God or negate God. But throughout the history of religion, especially the monotheistic religion, that's the problem of the monotheistic. In non-monotheistic polytheism, you don't have the question that sharp, because you always can say, well, the one God is better than the other one, and you can blame the other one, and so you don't have the concept of a one almighty God. That makes this question so difficult. So it's really a question which is really difficult for monotheism to deal with. But there was a third solution as well. Inside, not so much in Christianity, reasons we can talk about later, but in Judaism and Islam. That is to quarrel with God, to attack God. And this was a motive which was very, very much, it was a central motive, especially in the mystical literature of Islam, and also of Judaism, by the way, is not to justify God, not to deny God, but to do what Job did, to attack God. And that is what I think the book which is, does this in the most radical way. You can, probably we will quote some of the stories of Attar. The most radical way to attack God, but being a Islamic book in the realm of Islam would probably be the Musibat Name, the book of suffering by Fariduddin Attar. The story of my aunt is not at the end. Sometimes we now she could not speak anymore. She was lying there with, lying like a, with the anger in her eyes. But sometimes, I've seen it myself 3 or 4 times, she was able to speak Arabic prayers, although she could not speak at all. But somehow her lips were able to recite, 2 or 3 lines of difficult Arabic sentences, or just, this, or just sometimes it was more often, to say, "Ey Khuda, Ey Khudaya," "Oh God." And then for a moment, we saw some relief. So she still had the relationship with God. So this is an important point, and I think that God would not interfere in my talk by making me that these people, Attar describes, the holy man, the prophets, the fools, they love God. They do it as, they just expect God to act as his self-description in the Quran. They expect God to act like a God. And so they quarrel with him, but they believe in him at the same time. And that, is important to emphasize, that it's not a secular kind of thinking, because then God would not be relevant. But for these holy men, Attar describes, for these fools, and also for the prophets, Attar describes, God is the most central thing in their life. So maybe with that, short introduction into the book, I end here and open the discussion.
I think that we should ask, we would like this to be interactive and have you participate, so if we can begin with, microphone hai bhai, chota?
No, the voice is loud enough.
Yeah, I think it's a small room. Do we need
Yeah, I don't know if we don't need.
Boliye bhi.
I am written an essay on a similar topic, and what I have tried to analyze is blaming God, siding with God, justifying God, is mostly done in an anthropomorphic way, where it is we who assign human qualities to God, and because of that we find these various sufferings and so on which come out from that exercise. So perhaps the 4th or the 5th way is to understand God in a different way. And from the Quran, if you see Al-Hayyu Al-Qayyum, the living, eternal, self-subsisting, ever-sustaining, if that is the quality of God, it could not be an anthropomorphic God. Also, Surah Al-Ikhlas, Allahu Samad, God the immanently indispensable. If that is the attribute of God, it could not be a human God, or it could not be an anthropomorphic. So if we attack him anthropomorphically, that's where the problem comes in. So perhaps we have to see God in a different way. That's my...
Well, of course, but I would add this kind of thinking. I mean, this was done in Islamic, especially more in Islamic philosophy than in theology. I mean, that was the central point of most of the Islamic philosophers, and also of the Jewish philosophers who lived at the same time, spoke the same language, like Ibn Maymun or Ibn Sina or all the other philosophers who shared the same discourse. Well, that was really the point, to negate all kind of human attribution and say that it's something completely different. We cannot discuss it in the question. But I'm not a theologian. I'm a writer and a scholar. So I'm not saying that this solution is right or this solution is wrong. I'm reading literature, and so I try to understand this approach. And of course, the stories of Attar. Attar is, on the one side, he's a classical poet, and a very, very complex structure of his. But at the same time, the stories he is telling are stories from the storytellers. It's something of the people. And to the ordinary people, stories where God is really, blamed and attacked and, questioned are much more giving much more to the questions of the ordinary people who are suffering than the complicated and sophisticated answerings of the philosophers. You know, Ibn Sina or Ibn Rushd or Ibn Maimun or Al-Farabi. They, of course, have thought about the question and they've given philosophical answers. And I'm not here to say that they are right, but they are wrong. I put my finger on a forgotten chapter of Islamic literature. You know, one which is not widely discussed anymore. I mean, even the Musibat Naumain Iran, although Attar is a classical poet, his Musibat Naumain, no one knows about it. I mean, it's there, but no one has discussed it. So it's a forgotten motif in Islamic literature. So that is my task, not to say that, you know, one has to deal with the question. This is a book of literary and religious studies, and so that the one gives a different answer does not negate the answer which were given in completely different discourses of Islamic literature.
Now we have a request. One second. We have a request that you read a couple of passages, or if your throat is bad, I will read for you. But you select it. Sure. You have a question?
Yeah, I have two basic questions. I'm sorry. The first is whether man created God or God created man. Because the man created God because man is basically weak physically, though mentally is very strong, but physically is weak. And just to address a few people's vested interests, the God was created. This is one view. I want your comments on that. And second question, which is also a very basic question, whether God is a sadist because only Adam committed a mistake and he had created, say, about 14-15 billion people to suffer in this world. Thank you.
Well, my task is really not to answer these questions. You know, I hope that my book raises questions. You know, it's not, you know, the way I'm writing. You know, being a novelist at the same time and writing novels. My academic approach is not the one of a theologian who answers questions, but to study, you know, the world of today or study the literature in order to get things more complicated rather than to make them more easy. And I think that is the task of all intellectual approach, not to give answers but to raise questions. And if my book would start people to think, you know, readers to ask themselves the questions, you know, I won't give you an answer that, you know, it's not my, who am I to say God has created man or man has created God. I mean, that is every one of you would have to find a solution for yourself. I'm just, you know, studying things who made myself, you know, asking a lot of questions and to give these questions to the readers. And I think that a poet of the 13th century who has done such radical, you know, given us such radical poetry, questioning God, you know, has something to tell us. You know, because the questions, you know, Attar lived in a time, it is important to note, when his own reality broke down. The Mongols came, and even before the Mongols, the time where Attar lived, I mean, he himself has seen how Nishapur, the city where he lived, was destroyed twice in his life. One because of an earthquake, and one because of the war. And then at the end, as the legend tells, he himself was killed by the Mongol invaders. So he lived in a time where all the answers theologians gave, you know, just didn't work anymore. And so he picked up the stories which were there before. So that would be my answer, is that you have to answer yourself. It's not.
I wanted your comments.
Well, I'm a religious person in a way, but definitely not in an orthodox way. So I think that my own questions would not be dealt with if there was no God. I mean, for me, that would be too easy I mean, I think in the way I grow up in a religious family is to deal with all this question with probably not in a God which has anthropomorphistic attributes, but still the question why this earth is although, I mean, it should be just, it's not just, this is a question which is still there. And but this is a book which is not, it's an answer which is not dealt with in the book, and it's it's a question of personal piety, and so it's outside the discourse of my book.
Mr. Kermani, I think what I would like to submit here, that the universe is a really mysterious place, and the mysteries of the universe are as endless as the universe itself. And the human mind is just not strong enough to determine the existence or the non-existence of a God. But I fully agree with you when you say that people suffer in life for no fault of theirs. I can say that through experience, that the more upright and the more righteous a person, the more he suffers. That's a matter of personal experience now. So things like this, don't they consolidate your belief in something called predestination? Don't you think that a person's fate is charted out before he comes into this world?
Again, the question is, my answer will be here. I'm not a theologian. I'm a scholar of literary studies and of religious studies. So this is a really different task. It's not that I don't have an opinion, but it's not my task. It's not my scholar does not tell you his own opinion, but he studies texts. Of course, there's a personal approach. There's an empathy with certain authors, with certain texts. Why he's choosing these texts? Because they speak to him. But it's an important thing. I think also that's why I'm so much emphasizing this point, is to differentiate our profession with those of preachers, those of theologians. I don't say that theologians don't have a legitimate cause. They have to be, but it's not that it's not my interest and not my profession. And I emphasize this because I know that from Iran, the country where I come from, it's gotten difficult to differentiate between these two tasks. The moment when you deal with religious texts, you're supposed to give answers which are in common with the kind of theology which the authorities give you. And the moment you study text like I study, you become, one is questioned. I mean, this book could not be translated into Persian. There's no way.
It is increasingly becoming the same here also.
So for me, it's important to...
It's very important to understand that this is not a book about God, but it is a book about Attar and his
Exactly.
work.
Exactly. That's why I'm so much emphasizing.
Read out a few passages from the book. It'll be.
One
We'll get a
second.
better idea of what it is about.
This gentleman has been very patient. Let him ask his question, and then we will read.
Thank you. I've been very patient, but I've just changed the course of my question. But I would like to comment on Sir's saying that he said that we cannot put human attribute to God. But from where that he was taking reference, that 99 names that we read in Quran are the same attributes that we human have. So we have to take reference from somewhere else rather than religious books, the God-sent books for answering that question. So my question to you would be that you have put the name of your book as The Terror of God. So and you would have come to some conclusion while writing this book and while contemplating on the subject. So how would you conclude or justify the terror of God in your own from your own personal perspective? It is not a theologian question.
Look, Attar's book are pieces of literature. They are not theological.
Your personal view.
Let me. Okay. So I'm dealing with literature, and I'm coming from literature, So it's our job is not to give, you cannot give, let's say, conclusion of a piece of literature, of a piece of poetry, being it in 2 or 3 lines, or giving that is a thesis. So this is true for literature, and it's true for my own thinking as well. So it's not that maybe today I give a different answer than I had given yesterday, or maybe in my own mind things are different conclusions may be at the same time, and that's the way how we live. I think this kind of thinking of being able in one mind to deal with complexity, with different things, which on the one side I would in my thinking, I would completely, in my way of thinking, I would completely agree with the Islamic philosophers who emphasized that God is not to put away with all the anthropomorphic attributes to God, and the 99 names of God are just in a symbolic way. It's not. So that would be.
It's written in the Quran.
I would. It's
If we take this book as
but
total.
But then you would negate. Then you would. But then if you would stop with that, then you would negate all the history of Islamic philosophy. They tried to understand, on the one side, God as something being completely different to human being, and on the other side, to bring that together with all the attributes which are given in the Quran. So they didn't stop by saying it's written in the Quran and that's the end of the story, but they tried to bring that together with the idea of God. So that's why there is an Islamic philosophy, because it's complicated. It's not, it's not written there.
It should not be complicated. Let me just comment on this, please. Then it will lead to another question: that if those attributes are maybe limited to us humans and limitless to the God. So and if taking the reference from the same book, if he loves us humans as the love of a mother, then why he would be so cruel and terrorize us and send all the destructions on the previous nations who were not able to follow his commandments? So how would we justify those attributes that we are taking from the Quran, that he loves us as 70 times more than a mother, but he still, on the other hand, destroys us with the biggest of our destructions?
So you're putting the question, not giving.
The question is that if you are saying that we cannot, that we are taking the reference from the same book, so either we should be able to justify all the things that we are taking reference from, or we should take perspective from some other information source. No, I disagree. I'm sorry. If Samina, you're moderating, then
No,
My hand has been up for a while.
Sorry. 1 second. Yes.
I'll just also read out from what I was given is initially 1 question per person till you get the answer, and then you raise your hand again and not engage in a discussion, please.
Because of time.
Yes.
Because of time. This is a very complex
Yes,
subject.
because we can start a discussion within the room, and that would be very. And you rightly mentioned, my question was to Mr. Navid Kermani, that why not? And I have understood your point of view, that you're a scholar, literary writer. You are philosophizing on the question of metaphysical questions about existence or non-existence of all the theories of healing, of Attar's approach, negation, everything. So 2 minor questions. Is ijtihad in your line of, particularly it's very prevalent in Iran, does that debate the way does God not exist and all, if he theologically, because you are mentioning, and I'm assuming, and that is why the question from Quran is coming, I could be right now sitting here agnostic, atheist, whoever, so you can't assume that I'm a Muslim. All of us may not be Muslims here, so obviously we're not referring to the God of Quran alone. You're probably talking about the creator, or are you talking about the God of Quran as The Muslims know it, number one. Number two, why do you keep saying it's not my job and it's not my job? You're not a politician either, and you're not a statesman, but you had such fabulous comments on Afghanistan, on terrorism, and on all of that. So if you have any interest in theology, so maybe I can be naughty and say, does God not exist? Or does?
Okay. The first question is, because I'm studying in this book, first of all, pieces of Islamic literature. I mean, I'm studying also Christian and Jewish authors and poets, but so the reference is, of course, the God which is referred to in the books which I'm studying. So that's a point here. And the second, as I've told before, as I said before, is to emphasize the point that that my task is not to give solutions but to raise questions, because that is a fundamental point for me as a writer, as an intellectual. It's not that I don't think about, when I go to a country which, like Afghanistan, or, traveling around, giving travelogues, you have so many opinions about something. I myself got, whatever you read, someone has an opinion about something, although he doesn't know about, one thing is that you have an opinion. My way of writing, both in my academic books, as well as in my travelogues, as well as, of course, in my novels, is, to try to show reality, both our reality, the reality of a country like Afghanistan or Pakistan or Iran, but also the reality of intellectual thinking, of history of thinking, as complex as it is. Not to simplify, but to show things as complex and contradictory as they are.
Is ijtihad part of the way forward for some of these questions?
Well, not for me myself, because I'm outside.
Some of these questions.
For some of course, but like in the Shiite theology, where ijtihad is still, accepted, but still, if you look in the Shiite thinking of today, well, many questions are not raised anymore. So officially, ijtihad is accepted, but politically, it's not. Many of the central questions, of course, the question of state authority, of course, are put away. And if you raise the questions, like many Iranian theologians do, many ayatollahs do, they end like the Grand Ayatollah Montazeri, who was the the highest theologian of Iran, but he was put in house arrest. So,
I would like to take a moment and let us listen, because this is a challenge to us. This is not something where we are being given one answer or a pat response. It's very complicated and nuanced, and to create and open our minds to the nuances of the many questions that the book poses, I think that if you read something, it would help us.
Well, I begin with one story, and then I will give you the book to read one piece of poetry. The one story is, of Mahmud of Ghazna. Mahmud of Ghazna in the Islamic literature, as you know, is very often portrayed, as someone stands for God, as in the kind of storytelling. So one story which is very typical of the way Attar, deals with the things is Sultan Mahmud of Ghazna, whom Attar often uses to exemplify the omnipotent ruler, is sitting alone in his palace. No one visits him, no one has a request, and not even beggars seek an audience. He roams alone through the expansive halls of his place. He is bored and lonely. What is the matter? He asks his vizier. Why does not one come to him anymore? Because justice currently prevails, answers the vizier. Then Mahmud sends out his soldiers to attack the villages, stirs people up against one another, and demands extortionate fees, taxes, and toll charges. At once, The king's hall fills with supplicants, people in search of advice, and those seeking mercy. Sultan Mahmud leans back, satisfied. So that is a very typical story of the way Attar puts. And one piece of poetry, maybe you read it. It tells the line of human experience from before birth, the moment of creation of human birth, until death, as a story of as a book of suffering itself.
And this is from Attar?
Yeah, that's from Attar.
So this is from Attar. In three darknesses, a seed without heart or religion, pressed mud, dipped in brackish water, he was struck this way and that like a ball in a game, so that he would learn confusion from the start. Grown in blood over 9 months, his sustenance was the blood of the womb. What happened to him there? Better not to ask. I spoke to you of his body, his soul. Better not ask. He tumbled headlong from his mother's lap, only to land in blood again. As his beginning was already in sewage, do not bother to hope for purity. A plaything, he grew fond of the blows from here and from there, meaning confusion became his nature. 9 months he spent in his own blood, meaning devouring blood is the start of everything. Thrown headlong into the world, drenched in blood, meaning it begins with separation, with reversal. In tears he then searched for the milk with his lips, meaning weep, for you belong to the species of mammals. Clawed into the bosom he saw nothing but blackness, meaning now live bitterly and darkly. As a child he ran, never lingered, meaning far from children is the peace of the soul. In his youth he pined, so foreign did he feel, meaning youth is nothing but a wayward path. Soon his mind became skewed from age, meaning expect no felicity from the foolish old man. At a loss, he finally sank into his grave, meaning no trace of a pure soul did he ever find.
I tell you, it's very short. And many of those who quarrel with God in Attar's book are fools, but fools seen as holy men. And like we know from Pakistan, especially nowadays, that these kind of people who are malang or people kind of. So one of these fools is very, very short, who is suffering and hunger and starving and thirst and people are not doing good with him and so on. Although he's very pious, he's a holy man. He stands. The fool stood up, raised his face to the heavens, and called out, "Maybe your heart has not grown tired of these pitiful goings on, but mine did long ago. How long shall this continue? Do you never grow weary of such things?" So that's the way they talk with God, in a very personal way, as if he's standing there, the complete opposite of the philosopher's approach. And the last one, maybe, it's has a social relevance even today, especially for Iranian poet. I give it to you. Attar at his time was very critical of the mullahs. Both of the rulers he attacked in his book, very much the worldly rulers, but also the theologians of his time. And that's another reason why books like this, although they are in the libraries, they are not very much discussed in the official discourse of Iran. I just read, you read one line about the theologians of the mullahs, what Attar wrote in his book of. It has nothing to do with the topic, or not so much to do with the topic of a talk, but has a lot to do with contemporary world of Islam, maybe.
You have castles like those of kings. You live like Khusro, not in the poverty of Ali. You have prettier robes than the ladies. Ride on horses like those in Karun's stable. Your faces are darkened and grim. Your characters and ways are devilish in nature, bound to pharaonic customs. the morning rites of those who worship the flames. Your qualities are worthy of King Shaddad: megalomania, greed, and lust for popularity. All these are your attributes, and there are still worse. Only one is alien to you, the faith of Muhammad. You are captives to custom, dignity, and office by day or by night. There is only one thing you lack, the faith of Muhammad. I think this should be the beginning of the Musibat Name of Pakistan. Wonderful.
I have a question that how will you define this phenomena that when we suffer, we as a human suffer so much so often, so we see Prophet's life as a template, we idealize their lives to solace us. How will you define this phenomena?
I'm sorry, we didn't understand your question. Could you please state
Actually,
it?
I'm talking about the initial part of your conversation in which you talked about that when we suffer so much, so often in our lives, and socially, when we suffer so much, so we think a lot about our prophets, the friends of God, just to solace us, just to calm down our desires, or you can say to calm down our depression or anhedonia. So how can you define this phenomena?
Well, I think people they need somehow a way to calm down their emotions, and I think although I'm not a communist at all, but at one point the famous point of Karl Marx that religion came out of the suffering of the people, to give answer to the suffering of the people. This is something which also a religious person could undersign that. That is the basic start of religion. I mean, go back in history of religion, to time when people were not able to write or they didn't have what was their life about? It was about catastrophe of nature. So they asked, what is about the heaven? Why the heaven brings us these kind of catastrophes? So this is the start of thinking, and then religions came, and they got more and more sophisticated and differentiated between things. But the basic things of all theological question is just this. I mean, why is the heaven? I mean, the heaven is something which is much more omnipotent as a human being. Human being, as we know, cannot deal with the things which nature does, and asking why. So I think that is until today, and probably in 1,000 years still, people will deal with the questions, and maybe they give different answers, but the basic point of it will be the same. If there is a world of justice, as the Quran portrays the world, remember in the Quran, even the Bible says that the world is just, but the Quran dramatically emphasizes this point, says that look around, if you only see one slightest things in the world which is not perfect, you won't find. But look around again, you won't find a single thing which is unperfect in the world. But at the moment, the readers of the Quran dealt with that, and that was, as I said, the starting point of Islamic Kalam. They saw many things which were not perfect. So they asked themselves why this portrait of the world as written in the Quran goes together with their everyday experience. So that is the question why, if the world would be as perfect as it is written, as the ayah portrays the world, then there would be no need for theology of religious thinking. The religious thinking is really to bring together ayahs like this with the experience of man.
Okay, last question, and then Navid can make a concluding remark. Remember, this is about reflection. This is not about easy solutions.
Talking about reflection, I'm so
You want the
glad
mic?
that I don't know I'm so glad that I have been trying, and I have tried to read The Conference of the Birds. Today you have convinced me that I should. really go get it and read it. But what is interesting is you're taking Athar's Conference of the Birds, Athar's questioning of Allah, is something that we as Muslims have to start to question. We have started to accept whatever is said to us, the wrongs that are done, the injustices that are done. We think, well, it's the will of Allah. It is not. Allah even himself says, don't become victims. Stand up, ask, change. And I think we are at a stage in Pakistan where we have to start to ask and question our religion, the things that are put on top. And we are told, this is Allah's will, this is what we should do. We cannot do this. I think you have brought that out today extremely well. Thank you very much.
Do you have a concluding remark? We're going to ask Navid for a concluding remark, and then he will be at the book signing booth if any of you would like to get the book or look at the other incredible things that he has written for us.
Yeah, I will just take up what you have said in your, because this was a conclusionary remark, which I very much agree to. But I would like to take it up and after saying, emphasizing so much that I'm a scholar, I'm a novelist, I'm not, but hinting to the political dimension of such a work. I think that cultures are strong always in history when they were self-critical, when they questioned the authorities, when they questioned the truth which was given to them in schools and by preachers and by politicians and whatever. You see that European Enlightenment started with questioning the authority of both of the church and also of giving truth. But it's not stopped with that. It's also started with curiosity about other cultures. Even in a political, very negative way, like colonialism, which is politically, of course, a catastrophic. But still, at the other side of that approach was also a side kind of translating and studying and so on. And so, what we find if you look at Islamic literature, especially in the high time of, we find, so much critique of everything what is there, even critique of God, the most highest authority. Where it went to, it's, I speak about Iran and not about Pakistan, but you will easily translate these things. We don't find this kind of self-critique, of questioning the authorities anymore. You find it in the literary discourse, in the secular discourse, but it went out of the religious discourse. Attar in his time was a religious figure. He was not a secular poet. He was not a poet of the courtyards. He was a poet of, he was a theologian, a mystical poet, and he was referred to as a religious figure. So this self-critique, the critique of given answers, was dealt with inside Islamic discourse. And that is the problem of today, that you might find this kind of thinking in a secular thinking, but that makes religion weak, because before it was, these things were dealt with inside religion. So that made religion strong, because it could answer, And so that would be maybe the political, let's say, dimension of books like this, is to show that the way of thinking we have now is not the way of thinking in Islamic tradition. That Islamic tradition is much more open and much more self-contradictory and much more complicated than it is portrayed by Islamic thinking of today. And it's tried to get back the Islamic thinking, the Islamic literature, get out of the hands of those who are nowadays, deal with that kind of thinking from the councils of the mosques.
All the imams did, Navid. They were all in opposition, they always were questioned, they were always negating, answering and all that, and living in humble poverty in the jails. And that's where the theologians and the mullahs need to go.
Anyway,
But
could I just say
yes.
thank you to Navid for opening our minds and for leaving us with such a rich set of possibilities. We thank you so much, and you've really helped us, and we are inspired, and we are going to question absolutely everything from now forward. So thank you. Join me in thanking Navid, please.
Yes, please.
Thank you.
And please remain seated. We'd like to acknowledge Naveed with a little token of appreciation. And just alongside with that, we need to thank our moderator, Samina, and Naveed, both of you, for this morning's session. Please be seated till our volunteer escorts them out of the hall. Thank you.